The Vampire King hadn't allowed a human to touch him in 317 years, but tonight he was bleeding silver onto white marble, and his guards had dragged in the only healer foolish enough to enter vampire territory after dark. Helena Ortiz knew she was going to die the moment she saw him. He sat, slumped against an ornate throne in what appeared to be a ballroom beneath the city, somewhere in the labyrinth of tunnels that honeycombed the earth below Manhattan. His skin was alabaster white, luminous even in his weakened state, and his hair fell past his shoulders in waves of pure silver white that seemed to glow against the dark velvet of his torn coat. Blood not red, but shimmering silver seeped from a wound in his side, spreading across the floor in an otherworldly pool that reflected the candlelight like mercury. His eyes, when they fixed on her, were the color of frozen violets, ancient and furious and filled with a pain that went far deeper than the physical wound in his flesh. "My lord Sorin Morven," one of the guards said, his voice tight with barely concealed terror. "The human healer you requested." "I requested no human," the king said, his voice a low rasp that somehow still commanded the entire room. "I requested a healer. That you brought me this proves how desperate we have become." Helena's hands tightened on her medical bag. She had been pulled from her clinic in the middle of treating a gunshot victim, bundled into a car with windows so dark she couldn't see out, and brought to this impossible place. She knew about vampires, of course. Everyone did, ever since the great revelation 15 years ago when they had stepped out of shadow and myth into the harsh light of modern reality. But knowing they existed and standing in front of their wounded king were two entirely different things. "I don't know what you think I can do," she said, surprised her voice came out steady. "I'm a trauma surgeon, not a veterinarian. I don't know vampire anatomy." Several of the guards hissed at her words. One stepped forward, hand on his sword, but Sorin raised one pale hand and the guard froze. "Anatomy is anatomy," Sorin said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Blood is blood. Flesh is flesh. Can you close a wound, or can you not?" "That depends on whether you'll let me close enough to examine it," Helena replied, "and whether you plan to kill me before or after I try to help you." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or the ghost of amusement. "You have courage, foolish perhaps, but courage nonetheless." He gestured toward himself, a movement that made him wince. "Approach, do what you can. If I intended to kill you, you would already be dead." That was not as reassuring as he seemed to think it was, but Helena moved forward anyway. She had sworn an oath to heal, and that oath didn't include an exemption clause for supernatural beings who looked like they'd stepped out of a Gothic painting. She knelt beside him, setting her bag down and pulling on latex gloves. This close, she could see the details that marked him as profoundly other, the perfection of his features that was just slightly too symmetrical to be human, the way his chest barely moved with breath, the ancient weight in his eyes that spoke of centuries lived in darkness. "What caused this?" she asked, carefully pulling aside the torn fabric of his shirt. The wound was deep, a puncture that had clearly been made by something large and serrated. The edges were ragged, and that silver blood kept flowing, too much of it. Silver blade," he said quietly. "Forged with old magic. Designed specifically to kill my kind. Someone tried to assassinate you. Someone succeeded in wounding me. The assassination attempt failed only because I am older and stronger than they anticipated." His jaw tightened as she probed the wound's edge. "I have survived worse." "This is infected," Helena said, frowning. "Or something like infected. There's foreign material in here and your body is rejecting it." She looked up at him. "I need to debride the wound, remove the contaminated tissue and close it. It's going to hurt, and I don't have anesthesia that will work on you." "Pain is an old companion," Sorin said. "Do what must be done." Helena worked quickly and efficiently, aware of the dozen pairs of eyes watching her every movement, aware of the profound strangeness of using modern surgical techniques on a creature that had probably been alive when surgery meant a saw and whiskey. The silver blood was warm against her gloved hands, warmer than human blood, and it seemed to shimmer with its own light. Sorin didn't make a sound as she worked, though she could feel the tension in his body, could see his fingers digging into the arm of his throne hard enough that the wood splintered. His control was absolute, terrifying in its completeness. "Why silver blood?" she asked, partly to distract him, partly because she genuinely wanted to know. "We are creatures of moonlight and shadow," he replied, his voice strained but steady. "Silver is the moon's metal. Our blood reflects what we are." "That's poetic." She irrigated the wound, watching the contaminated blood wash away. "Also probably makes it really easy for your enemies to track you." "Yes." A pause. "You speak to me as though I am human. Should I speak to you differently? Most humans either grovel or tremble. You do neither." Helena glanced up at him as she prepared her suture kit. "Most humans probably haven't spent the last decade working in emergency rooms in New York City. After you've held together a teenager's intestines while gang members threaten to shoot you if their friend dies, a vampire king is just another patient." This time, he definitely almost smiled. It transformed his face for just a moment, made him look less like a marble statue and more like a person. Then it was gone, and he was remote and regal once more. "You are either very brave or very stupid," he said. "I'm a trauma surgeon," Helena replied. "Those aren't mutually exclusive categories." She threaded the curved needle. "This is going to hurt worse than the rest. I have survived worse than pain." She believed him. There was something in his eyes, a darkness that spoke of profound suffering endured over impossible spans of time. She wondered what it took to wound a vampire king so deeply that the hurt still showed after centuries. The sutures went in cleanly, her hands steady despite the surreal circumstances. She worked in silence, focused on the task, on making each stitch perfect and even. This close, she could smell him, not blood or death as she might have expected, but something cold and clean like winter wind, with an underlying scent of old roses and older stone. When she finished and tied off the final suture, she sat back on her heels and stripped off her bloody gloves. "That's the best I can do. The wound should close on its own from here, assuming you have any kind of accelerated healing." "We do," Sorin confirmed. He looked down at her work, then back at her face. "You have skill, and you did not flinch." "I've had a lot of practice not flinching." Helena began packing up her supplies. "Though I'll admit this is the first time I've sutured a vampire, or been kidnapped to do so." Kidnapped is such an ugly word. "What would you call it?" "A conscription." He shifted slightly, testing the sutures. "You will be compensated for your time and expertise." "I'd rather be compensated with a ride home and a guarantee that your people won't drag me back down here again." Helena stood, closing her medical bag. "I have actual patients who need me. Human patients." "You would refuse payment?" Sorin's eyes narrowed. "Gold? Jewels? We have wealth beyond measure." "I would refuse being made into the vampire king's on-call surgeon," Helena said bluntly. "Look, I did what you asked. I helped you. But I have a life up there, and it doesn't include making house calls to the undead." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The guards shifted, hands moving to weapons. Sorin's expression had gone cold and remote. All traces of that almost smile vanished. "You speak very boldly for someone entirely at my mercy," he said softly. Helena's heart was hammering, but she kept her voice level. "If you wanted me to be afraid, you should have let me know before I saved your life. Too late now." For a long moment, Sorin simply stared at her. Then, inexplicably, he laughed, a short, harsh sound that seemed surprised out of him. 317 years, he said, more to himself than to her. 317 years since I allowed a human to touch me, and the first one brave enough to do so tells me to leave her alone." He shook his head slightly. "Very well, Helena Ortiz. You will be returned home, unharmed, with my thanks for what they are worth." "They're worth more if you mean them," Helena said. "I do." He gestured, and 2 guards moved forward. "Escort her home. Personally, ensure she arrives safely." "My lord," one of them began. "Now." The single word carried such weight of command that both guards immediately bowed and turned to Helena. She let them lead her out, though she couldn't help glancing back once before she left the ballroom. Sorin was watching her still, those violet eyes unreadable, one hand pressed against the wound she had closed. In the candlelight, with his white hair and paler skin, he looked like something carved from moonlight and memory, beautiful and terrible and profoundly alone. Helena told herself that was the last time she would see him. She told herself that all the way home, through the dark tunnels and up into the bright, noisy chaos of the city above. She told herself that as she scrubbed vampire blood from under her fingernails and returned to her clinic to finish her shift. She was still telling herself that 3 nights later when the guards came for her again. This time they were more polite about it, which somehow made it worse. They waited outside her apartment building like a security detail, all dressed in dark suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent. When she emerged for her morning run, the tallest one stepped forward and inclined his head. "Dr. Ortiz, Lord Sorin requests your presence." "Lord Sorin can request all he wants," Helena said, adjusting her earbuds. "I'm off duty." "He is ill." That stopped her. "What do you mean, ill? The wound was healing cleanly when I left." "It opened again. There is something wrong. He will not allow our healers to touch him. He asked for you specifically." Helena wanted to say no. She should say no. She had a 12-hour shift starting in 8 hours, and she needed this run to clear her head, but the guard's expression was genuinely worried, and she remembered the way Sorin had looked at her with those ancient, pained eyes. "Let me change," she said finally, "and this time I'm bringing more supplies." The ballroom looked different in her second visit. She could see the details now, the soaring Gothic arches, the faded murals on the ceiling depicting some long-ago battle, the way candlelight caught on gold leaf and old silver. It was beautiful and eerie, a slice of the medieval world preserved beneath steel and concrete. Sorin was still on his throne, but he looked worse than before. His skin had taken on a grayish cast, and the wound in his side had indeed reopened, silver blood seeping through fresh bandages. He watched her approach with eyes that were fever bright. "You came," he said, and there was something like surprise in his voice. "Apparently I'm stupid as well as brave," Helena replied, kneeling beside him and pulling on fresh gloves. "What happened? The sutures should have held." "I pulled them out." She froze, then looked up at him sharply. "You what?" "I could feel them, foreign objects in my flesh. I could not—" He trailed off, jaw tight. "I could not bear it." Helena sat back on her heels, studying him. There was more to this than simple discomfort, she was certain. The tension in his body, the way his hands gripped the throne's arms, the fever brightness in his eyes, this was psychological as much as physical. "How long since you last let someone touch you?" she asked quietly. "You said 317 years. What happened 317 years ago?" "That is not relevant to my current condition." "I think it is." She kept her voice gentle but firm. "I think whatever happened has made you afraid of being touched, of being vulnerable. And I think that's why you pulled out sutures that were helping you heal." The silence that followed was profound. Several guards shifted uncomfortably. Sorin's expression had gone absolutely blank, the kind of blankness that was a mask over something enormous. "You overstep," he said finally, his voice very soft and very dangerous. "Maybe," Helena agreed. "But I'm a doctor, and my patient is self-sabotaging. So I'm going to overstep." She met his eyes steadily. "You need to tell me what happened, or this wound is never going to heal, no matter how many times I close it." For a long moment she thought he would refuse, would order her removed or worse. Then, slowly, he began to speak. 317 years ago I had a queen," he said, his voice distant. "Katerina. We had ruled together for 5 centuries before that, through wars and peace, through the rise and fall of human empires. She was—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "She was everything to me." Helena waited, her hands still in her lap, sensing this was a story that had been locked away for centuries. "There was a plot," Sorin continued, "a faction within our own court who believed vampires should rule openly over humans, should take our place as the apex predators we were born to be. Katerina and I disagreed. We believed in the old ways, remain hidden, remain separate. Let humans have their world while we had ours." His fingers tightened on the throne's arms. "The plotters poisoned her, not to kill but to weaken. Then they brought in human hunters, told them where to find a weakened vampire queen." Helena's breath caught. "Oh no." "I found her in our chambers. The hunters had—" His voice cracked, the first real break in his composure she'd seen. "They had taken their time, used silver blades, made sure it was slow. By the time I arrived, she was beyond saving. I held her as she died, and the last thing she said was, "Beware the touch of humans." He looked at Helena then, and his eyes were haunted. "I killed the hunters. I killed the plotters. I killed anyone who had even known about the plan, and then I swore that no human hand would ever touch me again." "But I touched you," Helena said softly. 3 nights ago. I was dying, or close enough to it, and my people were desperate enough to break my oldest command." He gestured at his reopened wound. "This is what happens when I try to accept it. My body remembers, even when my mind says the threat is past. I feel human hands on my skin, and I am back in that chamber, watching Katerina die." Helena was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then she carefully pulled off her gloves and held out her bare hand. "Don't," Sorin said immediately, his entire body tensing. "I'm not going to touch you," Helena said. "Not yet. But I want you to look at my hand. Really look at it." Slowly, as if approaching a trapped animal, he let his gaze drop to her outstretched palm. "These hands have held together torn flesh and kept people breathing when their bodies wanted to give up," Helena said quietly. "They've delivered babies and closed the eyes of the dying. They've caused pain when necessary to heal, and they've offered comfort when healing wasn't possible. They're not the hands that hurt Katerina. They're just hands attached to a person who wants to help you. You cannot understand. You're right, I can't, not fully. But I understand trauma, and I understand how it lives in the body long after the mind knows it's safe." She lowered her hand but didn't put her gloves back on. "I need to resuture that wound. And this time, I need you to leave the sutures in, which means we need to work through this, or you're going to keep reopening it until you actually do die." "Why do you care?" Sorin asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. "I am not your people. This is not your world." "Because you're suffering," Helena said simply. "And I'm a doctor. That's enough." He stared at her for a long time, those violet eyes searching her face for something. Then, very slowly, he nodded. "Tell me what you need me to do," he said. "First, I'm going to clean and close the wound again. While I do that, I need you to focus on my voice, on staying present. If you start to panic, tell me. We'll pause." Helena pulled her gloves back on and prepared her supplies. "Second, and more importantly, you're going to have to let yourself heal. That means leaving the sutures in place even when they feel foreign, even when they scare you." "I am a vampire king," Sorin said, some of his old pride returning. "I do not experience fear." "Everyone experiences fear, even vampire kings who've lived for centuries." She began cleaning the wound, her touch gentle but efficient. "The trick is not letting it control you." This time, as she worked, she talked. She told him about her training, about the first time she had lost a patient, and how it had nearly made her quit medicine. She told him about growing up in the Bronx, about her mother who'd worked 3 jobs to put her through college. She kept her voice low and steady, a constant thread of sound to anchor him in the present. Sorin listened, his body gradually relaxing by small degrees. He asked questions occasionally about modern medicine, about the human world above, about her. His curiosity seemed genuine, and Helena found herself elaborating, painting pictures with words of a life he clearly knew little about. "You work very hard," he observed at one point, "to save people who will die anyway in a handful of decades." "Everyone dies eventually," Helena said, placing another suture. "That doesn't mean the time they have isn't worth saving." "Do you believe that? Truly?" "I have to. Otherwise this job would be unbearable." She glanced up at him. "Don't you believe that? You've lived for centuries, but you're fighting to stay alive now. That suggests you think your existence still has value." "Perhaps," Sorin said softly. "Or perhaps I simply am too proud to die from an assassin's blade." "Pride's as good a reason as any," Helena said. She tied off the final suture and examined her work. "There, that should hold if you let it." "I will try." He looked down at the neat line of stitches, then back at her. "You should not have to return. This should be sufficient." "It should," Helena agreed, packing up her supplies. "But I'm going to come back anyway, in 3 days, just to check." "That's not necessary. Humor me, I'm compulsive about follow-up care." She stood, pulling off her gloves. "Besides, you haven't paid me yet. I figure I should make sure my patient survives long enough to cough up those jewels you mentioned." That almost smile flickered across his face again. "You're a very strange woman, Helena Ortiz." I get that a lot. She shouldered her medical bag. 3 days, Your Majesty. Try not to pull out the sutures before then. She left before he could argue, but she felt his eyes on her all the way to the door. 3 days later, she returned as promised. The guards knew her now, greeted her with respectful nods, and led her through the tunnels without hesitation. The ballroom had been cleaned since her last visit, the bloodstains scrubbed away, fresh candles lit in the elaborate chandeliers. Sorin was standing this time, dressed in fresh clothes that somehow managed to be both medieval and modern, dark trousers and a white shirt with an elaborate coat over it, embroidered with silver thread. He looked stronger, the grayish cast gone from his skin, his movements fluid and controlled. "You came," he said, echoing his words from before. "I said I would." Helena set down her bag. "How's the wound?" "Healing. The sutures remain in place." "Good." She approached him, noting the way he tensed slightly but didn't retreat. "Can I examine it?" He nodded, a short, sharp movement. Helena waited for him to open his shirt, giving him control over the process. When he did, she could see the wound looked significantly better. The edges were knitting together cleanly, and there was no sign of infection or rejection. "This looks excellent," she said, genuinely pleased. "You should be able to remove the sutures yourself in another few days. They'll dissolve on their own eventually, but you'll be more comfortable if you take them out once the tissue has healed." "You could return to remove them," Sorin suggested. "You don't need me for that. It's simple, and I trust you not to reopen the wound." She stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself. "Congratulations, Your Majesty. You're going to survive. Thanks to you." He closed his shirt, his movements careful. "I owe you a debt." "You don't owe me anything. I'm a doctor. I help people." "I am not people, as you have noted yourself." He moved to a side table where a wooden box sat, ornately carved and clearly ancient. "Nevertheless, payment is due." He opened the box and Helena's breath caught. Inside were jewels that looked like they belonged in a museum, rubies the size of her thumb, emeralds that seemed to glow with inner light, ropes of pearls that shimmered in the candlelight. "I can't take those," she said immediately. "Why not?" "Because they're worth more than I make in a decade. Because I'd have no way to sell them without attracting attention. Because," she paused, "because they're too much." Sorin studied her for a moment, then closed the box. "What would you accept?" "Nothing. Seriously. I did what any doctor would do." "No," he said quietly. "You did far more than that. You saw a monster bleeding and chose to help. You saw a king breaking under the weight of ancient trauma and chose to stay. You are owed a debt, Helena Ortiz, whether you will accept it or not." There was something in his voice, an intensity that made her heart skip. She found herself looking at him, really looking at him, and seeing not the regal vampire king, but the person beneath. Someone who had loved and lost and lived with that loss for 3 centuries. Someone who was lonely in a way she couldn't quite fathom. "Then let the debt be this," she heard herself say. "Tell me about your world, the real one, not the sanitized version humans get. I want to understand." Sorin blinked, clearly not having expected that. "Why?" "Because I've spent the last week thinking about what you told me. About Katerina and the plotters and everything that came after. And I realize I know almost nothing about vampires, beyond the basic facts they teach us in school." She met his eyes. "You said I helped you. Let me really help you. Talk to me. Let someone actually know you." For a long moment, Sorin was silent. Then he gestured to a pair of chairs near one of the tall windows, though what they looked out on, Helena couldn't imagine, buried as they were beneath the city. "Very well," he said. "I will tell you about my world, if you truly wish to know it." And so began something neither of them had anticipated. Helena returned to the underground court not as a doctor to a patient, but as a visitor to a strange land. Sorin showed her the full extent of the vampire realm beneath Manhattan, the great halls and galleries, the libraries full of books so old the pages crumbled at a breath, the chambers where his people slept through the daylight hours in elaborate coffins lined with earth from their birthplaces. He introduced her to members of his court, ancient vampires with names that sounded like poetry and eyes full of centuries. They regarded her with everything from curiosity to hostility, but Sorin's presence kept them all civil. It was clear he commanded absolute respect, and that respect extended to those he chose to protect. He told her about vampire history, about the wars they'd fought among themselves, about the delicate balance they maintained with humans. He explained the politics of the vampire world, the various courts scattered across the globe, each with its own ruler, all of them connected by ties of blood and alliance that went back millennia. "We are not united," he admitted one night as they walked through a gallery lined with portraits of long-dead vampires. "We are fractious, proud, and often foolish, but we endure." "Like humans," Helena observed. "More like humans than most of my kind would care to admit," Sorin agreed. He paused before a portrait of a woman with white blonde hair and pale skin, her expression serene and knowing. "Katerina always said we were not so different from mortals, that our immortality made us more human, not less, because we had so much longer to make mistakes and learn from them." "She sounds wise." She was. He was quiet for a moment. "I have not spoken her name aloud in 300 years. Until I told you her story." Helena looked at him, seeing the grief that still lived in his eyes. "Thank you for trusting me with it." "You have earned trust," Sorin said simply, "through your actions and your persistence and your absolute refusal to be afraid of me." "I'm afraid of you," Helena corrected. "I'm just also curious about you, and I'm stubborn enough that curiosity usually wins." He laughed at that, a real laugh, warm and surprised. Helena found herself smiling back, aware that something was shifting between them, something neither of them had intended, but neither seemed able to stop. The visits became regular. Helena would finish her shifts at the hospital and make her way to the hidden entrance of the vampire realm, where guards now greeted her by name and escorted her to wherever Sorin waited. Sometimes they talked in his private chambers, a suite of rooms that managed to be both austere and luxurious. Sometimes they walked through the underground gardens where bioluminescent plants grew in place of flowers that needed sunlight. Sorin asked her endless questions about the modern world, about technology and medicine and culture. He had adapted to some things. He used a smartphone, though he complained about the screen being too bright, but others baffled him. Helena found herself explaining social media and streaming services and why people took pictures of their food, feeling absurd and charmed all at once. "Your world is very strange," Sorin said one night, shaking his head over her attempt to explain TikTok. "Everyone constantly observed and observing. No privacy, no mystery." "Says the man who lived through centuries when privacy meant not getting murdered in your sleep," Helena countered. "At least now people just post embarrassing videos." "I am unconvinced that is better." But he was smiling as he said it, that rare expression that transformed his face. Helena was smiling too, and she realized with a start that she was happy, genuinely, unexpectedly happy in a way she hadn't been in years. Her life above ground was exhausting long shifts, difficult cases, the constant weight of responsibility. But here, in this impossible realm beneath the city, talking to a vampire king who was slowly remembering how to laugh, she felt light. That realization should have frightened her. Instead, it felt inevitable, like something that had been building since the moment she'd first knelt beside him and refused to flinch. "What are you thinking?" Sorin asked, his eyes sharp. "You have gone very quiet." "That this is probably a terrible idea," Helena said honestly. "What is?" "This. Us. Whatever this is becoming." She met his gaze. "I'm human, Sorin. I have maybe 50 years left if I'm lucky. You're immortal. We exist in completely different worlds, and yet I keep coming back here, and you keep welcoming me. And I think we both know this isn't about medical follow-up anymore." The silence that followed was heavy with things unspoken. Sorin stood very still, his expression unreadable. "No," he said finally. "It is not about medical follow-up. It has not been for some time." He moved closer, and Helena's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "You are correct that this is a terrible idea. You are mortal and fragile, and your life is a brief flicker compared to mine. Caring for you is foolish. Allowing myself to want you is dangerous." "But," Helena prompted, her heart hammering, "but I find I do not care about wisdom or safety anymore." His hand came up, hovering near her face but not quite touching, still held back by centuries of fear. "You have reminded me what it is to be curious about the world, to laugh, to look forward to tomorrow because there is someone I wish to see." I thought I had forgotten those feelings. I thought Katerina had taken them with her when she died. Helena reached up slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, and took his hand in hers. His skin was cool, smooth as marble, and she felt him tense at the contact, but he didn't pull back. "I'm not Katerina," she said quietly. "I can't replace her. I wouldn't try." "I do not want a replacement," Sorin said. "I want—" He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I want you, for however long you can stay, for whatever time we have, and that terrifies me more than any assassin's blade." "Me too," Helena admitted, "but I think maybe the best things are supposed to be a little terrifying." She stood on her toes, telegraphing her intention, giving him every opportunity to retreat. Sorin stood frozen for a heartbeat, too. Then, very deliberately, he closed the distance between them and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he'd forgotten how. But when Helena pressed closer, her free hand coming up to cup his face, something in him seemed to break free. He pulled her against him, the kiss deepening, 300 years of isolation cracking open to let in warmth and want and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. "I should not do this," Sorin said, but he made no move to let her go. "I should send you away, protect you from the danger of being close to me." "Too late," Helena said. "I'm already close to you, and I'm not going anywhere. Your stubbornness will be the death of me. Technically, you're already dead." He laughed against her hair, and Helena felt the sound vibrate through her. "You are impossible. You like impossible." She pulled back just enough to see his face. "Besides, you tried being sensible and isolated for 3 centuries. How did that work out for you?" "Poorly," Sorin admitted. "I was miserable. So try something different. Try letting someone in. Try trusting that not every touch is a threat." She took his hand again, lacing her fingers through his. "Try believing that you deserve to be happy. With you. If you'll have me." He looked at their joined hands for a long moment, then up at her face. In his eyes she saw fear and hope, and something that might have been wonder. "Yes," he said simply. "I will have you, Helena Ortiz, for whatever time we are given." They were given 3 months of peace before the world intruded. 3 months during which Helena divided her life between the bright chaos of the hospital and the dark beauty of the underground court. 3 months of learning Sorin's moods and habits, of teaching him to accept touch without flinching, of slow kisses in candlelit rooms and long conversations that stretched until dawn sent him to sleep, and her to work. 3 months of falling completely, irrevocably in love with a vampire king who read her poetry in dead languages and held her like she was something precious, who protected her with fierce intensity and looked at her like she had hung the moon. Helena knew it couldn't last forever. The court was starting to notice their king's attachment to a human. She heard the whispers, saw the looks. Some vampires were merely curious, but others were hostile, viewing her as a threat or a weakness to be exploited. "They will not touch you," Sorin said when she mentioned it. "I have made my position clear." "You can't protect me from everyone forever," Helena pointed out. They were in his chambers. She curled against his side on an elaborate couch, his arm around her shoulders. "Eventually, someone is going to decide I'm a problem that needs solving. Then I will solve them." His tone was mild, but there was steel beneath it. "I am king, Helena. My word is law. Until someone decides to change the law." She twisted to look up at him. "I'm not naive, Sorin. I know how politics work, even vampire politics. The more time you spend with me, the more vulnerable you become. There are vampires in your court who already think you're weak for letting a human close. Then they are fools who do not understand the difference between strength and cruelty." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "I will not give you up to appease them. I'm not asking you to. I'm just saying we need to be realistic about—" The door to Sorin's chambers slammed open, and a vampire, Helena recognized as Lysander, one of Sorin's senior advisors, strode in. His expression was grim. "My lord, we have a situation." Sorin was on his feet instantly, moving between Helena and the door. "Explain." "The Southern Court has declared formal challenge. Lord Victor claims your attachment to a human has made you unfit to rule. He is demanding you step down or face trial by combat." The temperature in the room plummeted. Helena felt the air itself seem to thicken with Sorin's fury. "Victor," he said, "the name a curse. He was one of Katerina's killers. I spared him because his father begged for mercy. Clearly that was a mistake." "He has support," Lysander continued. "Several other court leaders have indicated they will back his challenge. They claim that a king who consorts with humans cannot effectively lead vampires." "This is my fault," Helena said quietly. "I'm the weakness they're exploiting." "No." Sorin turned to her, his eyes blazing. "You are not weakness. You are the only thing that has made me remember why ruling matters at all." He looked back at Lysander. "When is the challenge to be answered?" 3 nights hence, at the Grand Council. All court leaders will be present." "Good. Let them all witness what happens when someone questions my authority." He dismissed Lysander with a gesture, waiting until the vampire had left before turning back to Helena. "I will handle this." "How? By fighting Victor?" Helena shook her head. "That's what he wants. Sorin, a chance to kill you legally. He will not succeed." "You don't know that. You said he was one of the vampires who killed Katerina. He knows how to fight you. He knows your weaknesses." "I'm stronger than I was 3 centuries ago," Sorin said. "Stronger because I have something to fight for again." Helena wanted to argue, but she could see the determination in his face. Instead, she moved to him, wrapping her arms around him and pressing her face against his chest. "Don't die," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare die." "I have no intention of dying." He held her tightly. "I just found you. I will not give you up so easily." The 3 days before the Grand Council were tense. Sorin spent them preparing, drilling with his guards, consulting with his advisors. Helena spent them at the hospital, trying to focus on her patients, but unable to stop thinking about what was coming. She researched vampire trial by combat, reading everything she could find. It was brutal. She learned to fight to submission or death with ancient rules that seemed designed to maximize suffering. Silver weapons were allowed, magic was allowed, mercy was not. On the night of the Grand Council, Helena insisted on being present. "Absolutely not," Sorin said flatly. "The council chambers are no place for a human. It is too dangerous." "I'm going," Helena said just as flatly. "You can let me walk in with you, or I can sneak in on my own, but I am going to be there." They stared at each other for a long moment, a battle of wills. Finally, Sorin sighed. "Your stubbornness truly knows no bounds. You love it. I do, infuriatingly." He took her hand. "Very well, but you will stay behind my guards at all times. And if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments." "No arguments," Helena agreed, knowing she was lying, but also knowing Sorin knew she was lying. Some things were understood between them now. The Grand Council met in a chamber that put the ballroom to shame, vast and circular, with a domed ceiling painted with elaborate scenes of vampire history. Stone columns rose like ancient trees, and galleries circled the upper levels where lesser vampires watched the proceedings. The various court leaders sat enthroned like chairs arranged in a circle. They were a stunning array of white-skinned, white-haired beauty, each one radiating power and ancient pride. Helena, standing behind Sorin's guards, felt profoundly out of place. Victor sat directly across from Sorin. He was tall and lean, with silver hair braided intricately and eyes like chips of ice. When he looked at Helena, she felt a chill run down her spine. "The Southern Court has called this council," Victor said, his voice carrying through the vast chamber, "to address the matter of our king's fitness to rule." "The king's fitness has never been in question," one of the other court leaders said, an ancient female vampire named Isolde. "He has led us for over 8 centuries. He has led us in hiding," Victor countered, "in cowering beneath human cities, pretending to be extinct or harmless, and now he has taken a human lover, proving that he has forgotten what we are. We are predators, rulers, not pets to be domesticated." "Careful, Victor," Sorin said softly. "You tread very close to treason." "I tread on truth." Victor stood, and Helena saw he was armed, a sword at his hip, the blade almost certainly silver. "You have grown weak, Sorin Morven. Weak and sentimental. You are no longer fit to be king." "Then challenge me properly." Sorin rose as well, and the power radiating from him made the air crackle. "Stop hiding behind words and politics. If you want my throne, face me for it." Gladly. Victor drew his sword, and the blade gleamed silver in the light of 1,000 candles. By the old law, I challenge you for leadership of the vampire nation, trial by combat, to submission or to final death. The chamber erupted in noise, some vampires cheering, others protesting. Helena's hands clenched into fists, her medical training automatically cataloging the ways that Silver Blade could kill. Sorin drew his own sword, the blade dark as midnight. I accept your challenge, Victor, and when I defeat you, I will finish what I should have done 300 years ago. The rules were laid out quickly. The combat would take place immediately in the center of the circular chamber. No interference from outside parties, no mercy once begun. The fight would continue until one combatant submitted or died. Helena watched with her heart in her throat as Sorin removed his coat and handed it to one of his guards. Underneath, he wore simple fighting leathers that should have looked ridiculous on someone so regal, but instead made him look dangerous and deadly. He turned to her before taking his position, his eyes holding hers. "Do not interfere," he said quietly, for her ears alone, "no matter what happens." "Sorin, promise me. If Victor wins, you run. Lysander will get you out. Promise me, Helena." She wanted to refuse, but she saw the fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. "I promise," she whispered. He kissed her once, hard and fast, then strode to the center of the chamber. The fight, when it began, was like nothing Helena had ever witnessed. Sorin and Victor moved with inhuman speed, their blades clashing in a blur of silver and darkness. They were both ancient, both powerful, both fighting with the skill of centuries of existence. But Victor had planned this. Helena could see it in the way he maneuvered, in the strikes he chose. He wasn't trying to defeat Sorin quickly, he was trying to wear him down, to make him bleed. And it was working. Silver cuts began to appear on Sorin's arms, his chest. Each one wept that shimmering silver blood. Each one clearly pained him more than a normal wound would. Victor was methodical, almost surgical in his brutality. Helena watched in horror as Sorin was driven back, his movements growing slower, his breath coming harder. This was what she'd feared, that 300 years of isolation, of holding himself apart from everything, had left him vulnerable in ways he didn't want to admit. "He's going to lose," someone behind her muttered. "No," Helena said fiercely, "he's not." But she could see it happening. Victor landed a deep cut across Sorin's ribs, and the king staggered. Another strike, and Sorin went to one knee. Victor stood over him, sword raised. "Submit, and I will make it quick." "I do not submit," Sorin rasped. "Not to you, not ever." "Then die as your precious Katerina died, slowly and in pain." Something in Helena snapped. She knew she'd promised not to interfere. She knew it was probably suicide, but she also knew she couldn't stand there and watch Sorin die. She pushed past the guards, running into the combat circle. She heard shouts behind her, felt someone grab for her, but she was already moving, putting herself between Victor and Sorin. "Stop," she said, her voice ringing through the sudden silence. "This challenge is based on false premises. You claim Sorin is weak for caring about a human, but caring isn't weakness. It's what makes someone fit to rule." "A human speaks at the Grand Council," Victor said, his voice dripping with contempt. "How appropriate. This is exactly what I warned against." "You warned against a king who understands both vampires and humans," Helena countered. "Against a king who sees you as people, not just predators. You don't want a strong king, Victor. You want a tyrant who will let you terrorize humans without consequence." "I want a king who remembers what we are," Victor snarled. "We are vampires. We do not love humans. We feed on them." "You're wrong," Sorin said, climbing to his feet with visible effort. Helena could feel him behind her, could feel his fury at her interference, but also his fierce pride. "We are vampires, yes, but we are also capable of more than just hunger. Katerina taught me that, and Helena has reminded me." He moved to stand beside Helena, his hand finding hers. The gesture was deliberate, defiant. "This is what you fear, Victor," Sorin continued. "Not that I am weak, but that I am showing a different kind of strength, the strength to change, to grow, to be more than we have always been." "Pretty words," Victor spat, "but they will not save you." He raised his sword again. What happened next happened very fast. Victor lunged, aiming for Sorin, but clearly willing to go through Helena to get there. Sorin moved with desperate speed, shoving Helena aside and taking the strike meant for her. The silver blade punched through his chest, emerging from his back in a spray of silver blood. Helena screamed. But Sorin didn't fall. Instead, with the sword still through his chest, he grabbed Victor's wrist and twisted. There was a sickening crack, and Victor's sword fell from nerveless fingers. Sorin pulled the blade from his own chest with a roar of pain and fury, then drove it into Victor's heart. "This is for Katerina," he said, his voice cold, "and for every moment of peace you tried to steal from me." Victor's eyes went wide, then glassy. He crumbled to ash, the way vampires did when they met their final death. Sorin stood swaying over the remains of his enemy, silver blood pouring from the massive wound in his chest. Then his legs gave out, and he collapsed. Helena was there instantly, her medical training taking over, even as her heart tried to tear itself apart. She ripped open his shirt, exposing the horrific wound. It was deep, deep enough that she could see the edges of his heart through the torn flesh. "Someone get me supplies," she shouted. "Now!" The chamber erupted into chaos. Some vampires rushed to help. Others argued about what should happen next. Helena ignored all of it, focused entirely on the vampire bleeding out beneath her hands. "You promised not to interfere," Sorin rasped, his lips stained silver. "I lied," Helena said, her hands working to stem the bleeding. "And you took a blade meant for me, so we're even. Foolish woman. Stubborn vampire." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare die. Don't you dare leave me. Not planning to—" His hand found hers, gripped with surprising strength. "But, Helena, I need blood." She understood instantly. Vampire healing was accelerated, but it required fuel. And Sorin had lost too much blood to heal on his own. "Take mine," she said immediately. "No, too dangerous. Could kill you." "I don't care." She held her wrist to his mouth. "Take it. Live. That's an order." Sorin looked at her with eyes full of pain and love and desperate need. Then, very carefully, he bit. The sensation was strange, a sharp pain that quickly faded into something almost warm. Helena felt her blood flowing into him, felt his body beginning to heal beneath her hands. The wound in his chest slowly started to close, the torn flesh knitting back together. But she was also growing dizzy, the room starting to spin. She'd already lost blood donating at a blood drive last week, and now Sorin was taking more, and it was too much, too fast. "Stop," someone said. "He's taking too much." Helena felt Sorin's fangs withdraw. She looked down and saw him staring up at her, his lips stained red now instead of silver, his eyes clear and focused. "You saved me," he said quietly. "Partners save each other," Helena replied, or tried to. The words came out slurred, and the room tilted sideways. She woke up in Sorin's chambers, tucked into his elaborate bed with what felt like every blanket in the underground realm piled on top of her. Sorin sat in a chair beside the bed, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "How long?" she asked, her voice hoarse. 18 hours. You lost too much blood. I nearly killed you." His hands were clenched into fists. "I nearly killed you because I was selfish and weak and could not stop feeding." "But you did stop," Helena pointed out. "You stopped before it was too late. Barely." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "This is exactly what I feared. You in danger because of me. You nearly dying because I could not control myself." Helena pushed herself up, ignoring the way the room swayed. "Sorin, look at me." He turned, and she saw the anguish in his face. "I chose to save you," she said firmly. "I chose to give you my blood. And I would make the same choice again, knowing the risks. You should not have to make such choices. You should be safe, in your world, with your humans, not here, risking your life for a vampire who has brought you nothing but danger." "You've brought me joy," Helena said, "and love, and a sense of purpose I'd forgotten I could feel." She threw off the blankets and stood, walking to him on unsteady legs. "I'm not leaving you, Sorin. Not because of danger, not because of politics, not because you think you're protecting me by pushing me away. Helena, no. Listen to me. I love you. I love your pride and your pain and your terrible habit of trying to handle everything alone. I love the way you're learning to touch without fear and the way you look at me like I'm something miraculous." She took his face in her hands, making him meet her eyes. I love you, and I'm not going anywhere. Sorin stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her against him, holding her with desperate intensity. I love you, he said, the words muffled against her hair. I love you, and it terrifies me. I lost Katerina to my enemies. I cannot lose you too. You won't. We're stronger together than apart. We proved that. She pulled back to look at him. What happened after I passed out? With the council? They accepted my authority. Victor's challenge failed, both politically and physically. Several court leaders pledged renewed support. He smiled slightly. And they were all deeply impressed by the human who ran into a vampire duel to make a political speech. I didn't really think that through, Helena admitted. I noticed. It was terrifying and brave, and I wanted to throttle you and kiss you in equal measure. His expression sobered. But the threat is not entirely gone. There are still vampires who believe I am weakened by caring for you. There will be other challenges, other dangers. Then we'll face them together. Helena leaned up and kissed him softly. No more carrying everything alone. No more pushing me away to protect me. We're a team now. A team, Sorin repeated, as if testing the word. Then he smiled, real and warm, and full of the hope she'd been slowly teaching him to feel again. Yes? Very well. A team. The months that followed were not easy. There were vampires who challenged Sorin's authority, who viewed Helena as a target or a weakness to exploit. But there were also vampires who began to see what Sorin and Helena represented, a bridge between their world and the human one, a possibility for something new. Helena continued her work at the hospital, but spent her nights in the underground realm, learning vampire healing techniques and teaching them modern medicine. She became an unofficial ambassador between the worlds, trusted by both sides because she understood both. Sorin, for his part, began to emerge from his isolation. He started attending meetings with human officials, negotiating treaties and accords. He was still proud, still regal, still undeniably a vampire king, but he was also warmer now, more willing to compromise, more aware of perspectives beyond his own. You have changed me, he told Helena one night as they stood in his private gardens, watching the bioluminescent plants glow in the darkness. Made me remember who I was before grief and rage consumed me. You changed yourself, Helena corrected. I just gave you a reason to try. That is more than anyone has given me in 3 centuries. He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. I know your time with me is limited, that you will age and I will not, that eventually I will have to watch you die as I watched Katerina die. Sorin. Let me finish. His grip tightened. I know all of this, and I choose you anyway. For however many years we have, I choose you. And when those years end, I will not isolate myself again. I will remember what you taught me, that caring is not weakness, that love is worth the risk of loss, that staying open to the world is the only way to truly live. Helena felt tears prickling her eyes. That's a lot of pressure to put on one trauma surgeon. You can handle it. You are, after all, stubborn enough to argue with a vampire king. And you love me for it. I do. He pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that still sometimes surprised her, coming from someone so ancient and powerful. I love you, Helena Ortiz, my healer, my conscience, my heart. I love you too, Helena whispered, my vampire, my king, my Sorin. They stood there in the darkness, 2 beings from different worlds who had somehow found each other, holding tight to the love they'd built from trust and courage and the stubborn refusal to accept that some gaps were too wide to bridge. Above them, the city carried on, bright and loud and human. Below them, the vampire realm slept and woke and lived according to its own ancient rhythms. And in the space between, Helena and Sorin built a life together, complicated and sometimes dangerous, but filled with laughter and love and the quiet joy of being truly known by another person. It was not always easy. There were nights when Sorin woke from nightmares of Katerina's death, when Helena had to hold him and remind him she was alive, she was safe, she was here. There were days when Helena felt the weight of living between worlds, when she wondered if she'd made the right choice, if the love was worth the cost. But then Sorin would smile at her, that rare, brilliant smile that transformed his face, and she would remember why she'd stayed, Or she would watch him with his people, see the way he led with wisdom and compassion he'd rediscovered through loving her. And she would know the cost was worth it. 2 years after that first night when she'd been dragged bleeding and terrified into the underground realm, Helena stood beside Sorin in the Grand Council chamber. They were announcing a historic treaty, full integration of vampire and human medical knowledge, shared research into diseases that affected both species, cooperation on a scale never before achieved. This would not have been possible without Dr. Ortiz, Sorin said to the assembled court leaders. She has shown us that humans and vampires need not be enemies or predators and prey. We can be partners, allies, friends. The court leaders voted to accept the treaty unanimously. As the chamber erupted in applause, Sorin turned to Helena and took her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "For what?" "For being stubborn enough to save a wounded vampire king, for teaching him to trust again, for loving him despite all the reasons you should not." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with old-world gallantry. "For giving me back my life." Helena felt her heart swell with love for this impossible man, this ancient vampire who had learned to be vulnerable again because she had refused to give up on him. "You're welcome," she said, "but we both know you did the same for me. I was going through the motions before I met you, working myself to exhaustion because I didn't know what else to do with my life. You gave me purpose. You gave me a place between worlds that I never knew I needed. Then we saved each other." "Yes," Helena agreed, smiling up at him. "We saved each other." They left the council chamber together, walking through the underground realm that had become as much Helena's home as the world above. Vampires nodded to them as they passed, respect and warmth replacing the old hostility. Some even smiled, particularly the younger ones who had never known a time before their king had learned to love. In Sorin's chambers, they shed the formality of court, becoming simply themselves, a woman and a vampire who had found in each other something precious and rare. They talked late into the night, as they often did, about everything and nothing. Sorin read her poetry from books so old they predated printing presses. Helena showed him videos on her phone that made him laugh. As dawn approached and Sorin began to grow drowsy with the pull of the sun, Helena curled up beside him in the elaborate bed that had become theirs. "Sleep," she murmured, brushing his white hair back from his face. "I'll be here when you wake." "You are always here," Sorin said, his eyes already closing. "My constant, my North Star." "You're stubbornly persistent, Doctor," Helena corrected, but she was smiling. "That too." He pulled her closer, even as sleep claimed him. "Love you. Love you too." Helena lay awake a while longer, listening to Sorin's breathing slow into the deep stillness that passed for vampire sleep. She thought about the impossible journey that had brought them here, from that first terrifying night to this moment of perfect peace. She thought about all the obstacles they'd overcome and all the ones still to come. But mostly she thought about how sometimes the best things in life came from the worst circumstances, how love could bloom in the darkest places, how trust could be rebuilt even after centuries of betrayal and loss. She had walked into a vampire's court expecting to die. Instead, she had found a life richer and stranger and more meaningful than anything she could have imagined. She had found a partner who challenged and protected and cherished her. She had found a love that transcended the boundaries of mortality and immortality, human and vampire, fear and trust. She had found Sorin, and he had found her. And together they had built something neither could have created alone, a bridge between worlds, a partnership of equals, a love story for the ages. Helena fell asleep smiling, secure in the knowledge that when she woke, Sorin would be there, that they would face whatever came next together, that their love, hard-won and carefully tended, would endure. Years would pass. Helena would age while Sorin remained eternal. But that was a problem for later, for another day. For now, in this moment, they had each other. They had the life they'd built. They had love. And that, Helena thought, as sleep finally claimed her, was more than enough. It was everything. The end.